Okay, welcome to this restoration of a truly magnificent codex, which basically is a reference book of the laws of the Roman law from the time of Emperor Justinian. This is sort of pushing the boundaries a little bit for me here, in the sense this is the oldest restoration so far that I've taken on. It beats my previous record here by 10 years, so 1576. It's also the largest. This book is 16.5 inches by 11 inches, so it's a pretty huge tome. It's actually bigger than what would be normal folio, so that's going to bring with it some challenges. Just to sort of set the scene a little bit with this book. It's actually kind of interesting to look at the style in which this book's written. If I just open a page or two here, there we go. Probably worth looking at this page here. This is what I characterize as a very medieval style of the way in which the text is organized. Medieval manuscript was often written like this. Also, the very earliest books, so what we call incunables or post-incunables, that date from around the year 1500, you know, from the days of the Gutenberg Bible forward, basically. These 500-year-old books were also very much written in this style. I only have one example myself, which is this guy, the Decretals of Pope Gregory IX. And you can basically see the same pattern. So this was a very normal way of writing materials in very old books, you know, 500 or more year-old books. But the funny thing is that this book's dated 1576, which is actually pretty young for this style of writing to still be going on. To give you an example, this book here is a book about Roman sort of coinage and medals and so on and so forth. As I flip through it here, this could frankly be a modern book. You know, this could have been printed in the last few decades, looking at it. But this book was actually printed in 1553. So, you know, this is a sort of late Renaissance book as well. This is actually old. This guy, if you ignore the covers, this guy is actually older than this book by almost a quarter century, and yet this has the feeling of a modern book. And you know, I characterize this book as being a true book of the late Renaissance. This is a forward-looking book, you know, printed in with very much aspirations to the future, whereas this book was written, I think, with very much wanting to look to the past. You know, so even at the time this was printed, which is way over 400 years ago, it was already striving to be more antique and old-fashioned than maybe it really needed to be at the time it was put together. So, you know, this for me has almost, if you like, pretensions of antiquity in the way it was actually designed. It's very, very beautiful. You know, that's the way I would sort of characterize the way this was written. And so you have the actual Roman law itself is written here in the inner box, and then you have the notes, the actual commentary, if you like, on the law written on the outside, and then down these columns you have the notes on the notes. And the other thing that's interesting is if you look at the title, the numbering, these are numbered columns, not numbered pages. Again, that's a very medieval way of doing things, where you literally have two column manuscripts and you number each column, you know. So again, a very old style to the way this was put together, but nevertheless a very, very beautiful work. So what's the state of this book? If we sort of go like so, we can see we have these double leather thongs around which these loops are put, and that to make the raised bands. And as I look at this, it looks as though the first couple of gatherings are kind of loose, but the rest of it seems pretty well put together. We've got sort of the vestigial headband and tailband here, and these are pretty robust. Most of the raised bands themselves look to be in reasonable condition. That one's really tight. That's degrading at the end. That's going to need some reinforcement. This is in pretty bad shape across half the way. But then as we go further up, again, the headband's in good shape. This is in good shape, but obviously the first few are coming loose there. This, about 2/3 okay, but then this is loose. So what that's basically saying to me is we're going to probably have to re-sew in the first few gatherings here. But the rest of this, we can probably get away with sistering with a really thick cord. And the key thing is not to disrupt the headband or tailband. Those look pretty robust. So I'll probably sister these as well, but leave them intact other than the first few gatherings that are kind of loose anyway. It's worth noting that this practice of using sort of a double thong of leather, I've only again seen one example of that, which is again back to my post-incunable here, which did that in a very large way. But every single other book that I've restored would typically only have one core of the raise, you know, in each raised band. So again, in some ways, I think looking backwards in terms of, you know, looking to the past in terms of not just how it was printed, but also, you know, potentially how it was bound. And on the rear of the book, we have a cover. And it's very beaten and degraded. The sort of book's taken a real bash here at the corner, so, you know, the actual board itself is disintegrating in there. Probably, and this won't resolve very well on the camera, but what I want to try and show here is this design. This is not sort of your typical sort of leather tooling and so on. This is very difficult to show on the camera, but this is actually a small crater. This whole section here is indented inwards, which says to me that someone probably fashioned a stamp, what they call, I believe, a Malala stamp, I think. Fashioned a stamp out of wood and put the whole stamp, you know, on here, and probably just whacked, you know, with some gold leaf, and then just whacked the whole thing with a mallet or something, and it created this large indentation here with this beautiful pattern. So, you know, that kind of says to me, given the brutal way in which this was done, that says to me that this, I believe, may actually be original. It is possible that, you know, normally when you see leather like this, it's usually a subsequent restoration that was done in the, you know, mid-1700s or something like this. But I get the feeling that this is potentially an original cover. It's too degraded for us to be able to reuse them. We've only got one cover. So we will be putting new covers on this book, but it's just interesting to actually see the way in which this was done. Now, this cover actually is just still attached to the book here, and this paper here that's used for the paste down does look to be contemporary with the paper that's of the text block, at least to the eye. But one thing I do want to show here that's quite interesting. Just hope that this holds without slipping. So, embedded in here, I'm just going to zoom in, was something that caught my eye, and I'm just going to, sorry, forgive me, just altering the camera a little. Just going to lift this up. I don't know if you can see that there. There we go. There is actually a strip. There we go. It's a little bit more visible now. There's a strip of manuscript in here. And I have absolutely, no idea what the writing is. It's not any language that I have any idea what possibly it could be. Just looking at this, sort of maybe quite difficult to tell using the camera, but it looks as though, just zoom out, there's a strip that's probably 1.5 inches, I think, going up the whole way. It looks to be one contiguous piece of manuscript. So because we're not going to be able to save this board, we will have the opportunity to have a look at that manuscript and try and get a bit of understanding of the histories that it represents. So I think we're going to have some really interesting revelations coming out of getting the manuscript out from here. That's the only manuscript that's present in this book. Everything else has long since been lost. So, how are we going to do this? The plan is, the first step is we're going to need to try and save and reinforce areas such as here. Now, I will say these loops are very degraded, so what I'm going to be doing is using a nice thread to try and tie down these loops and putting in a couple of extra bits of leather or even wood here and there, or not wood, but you know, leather or something just to act as a replacement here, for example. So that'll be sort of an initial basic repair that we'll do. Then what I'm going to do is sister those bands with this cordage, which is, this is a cotton cordage, and if I sort of unravel it, you'll see it's 3 strands. So what I'm planning to do is to literally sister them with, you know, plenty of thread to tie down, and obviously the cords will come out like this, and these will be the attachment points to the boards, which I'll go on to in a second. And so we'll end up with, I think if I zoom out, we'll end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 existing raised bands, and I'm probably also going to sister the headband and the tail band as well. So we'll actually have 8 of these coming out. So that'll be 8 good strong attachment points to the new boards. So that'll be done like that. And then I guess the next step will be I'll show you the new boards. So the issue we have in terms of boards is the size of the book. It's not as if I can just recycle other book covers for this. The other thing is, you know, the boards themselves need to be really thick. And so I actually found a pretty good solution at Michael's, which was, instead of going for more traditional sort of thick card or book board, I'm actually going to use a couple of canvas boards that will be used by an artist. And that comes with several advantages. The first is you have this lovely rough canvas surface. That's going to be great for taking the glue and being a surface on, you know, which will just take the leather in a very smooth way. It's going to be relatively forgiving in terms of trimming to size. So obviously I'll need a cut here and here. And the other thing I can do is, these boards are not immensely thick, but what I can do is I can take 2, glue the inner surface together like this. Obviously we've still got the plastic on this one. And so you end up with a sort of a double thickness, which would basically approximate what the thickness of the original board would be. Now, the great advantage of that is I can hide things in here. So if it gives me optionality, because if it, in the future, I actually want to fix brass hardware to this book, clasps, in other words, all I need to do is cut a very narrow slit. If you imagine this is covered with leather, I can just cut a very narrow slit in one place, push the fixing, you know, just use a knife, separate the boards very slightly, push the fixing in, glue it in place, and I'm not having to actually damage what would be then the surface of the leather in order to actually put hardware in. So this really gives a nice optionality for doing something nice with sort of hardware and fixtures later on, should I want to. So we're going to end up with thick boards like this with 8 attachment points. And then what I'm going to do is, what I've ordered is a piece of really nice goat leather that'll approximate the color of this. I want something that's a bit paler than the recent restorations I've done. So I think, you know, that'll look very beautiful. And that's basically the plan. So the good news is, you know, we don't have to, you know, other than maybe the first couple of gatherings, we're not going to need to crank up the loom to re-sew this whole text block, which is great. So this should be a relatively straightforward restoration to do.